Hello, ethics students. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Professor Greg Whitlock. I'm going to be your instructor for Introduction to Ethics at Parkland College. I'm glad you're with me in this course. This session is going to be devoted to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and I am going to go in order of the books and chapters, and we're just going to walk through Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. We will start with Book 1, Chapter 1, and it starts with one of the most famous sentences in all of the history of Western philosophy. Aristotle begins his Nicomachean Ethics with the sentence that the good has been well defined as that at which all human activities aim. What that means is that the good, insofar as we can define it, is the goal of our human activities. If you think about it, every activity that a human undertakes is aimed at achieving something, a good, as Aristotle would call it, that we're trying to attain. You can think of good here as being synonymous with goal or end or purpose. In ancient Greek, there was one word that was equivalent to our words goal, end, and purpose, and that was the word telos, T-E-L-O-S. It means good, goal, purpose, end. All human activity aims at trying to achieve or attain some good. Now, that may seem clear enough if I do the human activity of standing up and going over to the stereo. I am trying to attain the good of turning it on. It doesn't have to be any more grandiose than that. Of course, we have higher purposes in life than turning on the stereo, but no matter what you can possibly name as a human activity, there is some goal or purpose behind it that we're trying to achieve. Aristotle, when he says this, is presuming or implying an image of human nature. And this is where we go deeper. Aristotle, for any one sentence that he wrote, had many multiple layers of depth or profundity that we can approach that sentence with. Here, what he's saying is that human nature is essentially good. Human nature is basically good because we are all aiming at trying to attain something that we take to be good. None of us are active in trying to achieve something that we take to be morally wrong or evil. Now, that does not mean that we never do any wrong. He's not saying that at all. Humans are basically good, and we're trying to attain some good, but that doesn't mean that we never do wrong. In fact, very often we do wrong, and in Aristotle's tragic view of the world, most of the time we are behaving in a way that is wrongful. How can that possibly be if we're always trying to attain the good in our activities? Here is the answer. Even though we are always trying to attain some good, we can miscalculate or misunderstand what the good is. Clearly, a serial killer thinks that he is doing some kind of good. That doesn't mean, though, that being a serial killer or serial murderer is good just because the person pursues it. That's not what Aristotle is saying. What he's saying is that the serial killer believes that he is doing good, but he has miscalculated. He takes the murder of his victims to be something good. That's the miscalculation. That is the misunderstanding. And so while we all go through life trying to attain the good, we can very often wind up doing the wrong. Now, from this basic premise that humans are always trying to attain the good, Aristotle phrases one of his most famous claims. Aristotle said famously that no one ever knowingly does wrong. That doesn't mean that we never do wrong, but that we never know it to be wrong when we try to do the action. So no one ever knowingly does wrong. Aristotle can be difficult to interpret and easy to misinterpret. So what you want to do is to get rid of the misunderstandings, the misinterpretations that you might have about his ideas, and what's left will be the real Aristotle. Now, behind all of this is not only an ethical principle that Aristotle is developing, it's also a psychological model. His psychology and his ethics go hand in hand. They're really two different sides of the same coin. Aristotle's psychological model is this. In our minds, in our imaginations, we form the image of something that we take to be good. We imagine something that we think is good. And then that mental image activates us to go after it and to achieve that thing that we have imagined. That's why our activity is always aimed at something good, because only an image of the good can activate us, can put us into motion. Further, what Aristotle is presuming here is that all human activity is rational. Now, that raises a gigantic issue. What do we mean by rational? And every major philosopher has had to come up with some definition or another of rationality. Aristotle is the most famous philosopher who defined mankind as the rational animal. What did he mean by this? Rationality, according to Aristotle, is the ability to reason backwards from an end to means. In other words, rationality is the ability to decide what the means are for achieving some end that we take to be good. So when I form a mental image of something that I find desirable, something that I want, something that I take to be good, then I reason backwards, well, how can I get that? That itself is rationality, because it's a stepwise procedure that's done entirely mentally. Okay, what that means then is that for any activity that I'm pursuing towards attaining some good, I have rational steps that I follow. And these rational steps or methods that I follow to attain my good, Aristotle calls an art or science. He says that every human activity has an art or a science behind it. This art or science is the mode and methods needed to attain that goal or good. So let's take a really mundane example. Let's say that I need to wake up tomorrow early, so I set my alarm clock. Now the goal is to wake up early, obviously. The activity is to set the alarm clock, but there's an art or a science to it, and it may not be grandiose, it may be very mundane, but if you've ever incorrectly set an alarm clock, you know that things can go wrong. There's a right way to set your alarm clock, there's a wrong way to set your alarm clock, and it's the art or science of that activity that determines whether that alarm clock is properly set or not. So rational beings are always going to follow an art or a science to get what they want, to get what they have imagined is good. This is, according to Aristotle at least, radically different than animals. When they pursue what they want, they don't do it by rationality, by reasoning backwards from an end to means. What they do is follow instinct. So that all animal behavior and activity, at least according to Aristotle, is entirely patterned in these instincts of the animal. Human beings do not have those instinctual patterns. We use our reason instead. Okay, the next complication that Aristotle introduces in Book 1, Chapter 1 is the idea of subordinate and master goals. Now, very many activities lead to a goal, but that goal then is an intermediate step to getting another goal, and that goal is an intermediate step to getting yet another goal, and so on and so forth. The activities and their goals that are intermediate links are called subordinate goals and subordinate activities. And the goals and activities that we aim at ultimately are called the master goal and the master activity. Okay, trying to bring this down to earth for a moment, let's again go to a very mundane example. I set my alarm clock to get up early. Why do I want to get up early? So I can feed the dog and cat before I leave for work. Why do I want to do that? So that I can go to work and earn a paycheck. Well, why do I want to earn a paycheck? So I can pay the mortgage. Why do I want to pay the mortgage? It keeps going and going and going. Some activities are subordinate to others, and some goals are subordinate to other goals. Now, Aristotle is then going to make the claim that unless our activity is just going to go on into infinity or ad infinitum, there has to be some ultimate goal that my activity is aiming at. Going back to my mundane example, why is it that I want to pay the mortgage and own the house? Because I believe that will make me happy. The master goal, the ultimate goal that all of my activity aims towards is to become and stay happy. So there's any number of intermediate steps that I have to take in my pursuit of happiness. And it's my rationality, it's my essence, my nature as a rational animal, that when I form an image of me being happy, I can reason backwards to all the steps that would be required for me to actually become, in fact, happy. There is one supreme goal of all of our activity, and that is indeed happiness. See how all of this fits together. A rational animal thinks in terms of means and ends. All human activity involves a distinction between means and ends. Now, thinking against Aristotle, we could say, well, don't some human activities have no purpose at all, no goal at all, no aim at all? There might be, but then they would not be rational activities. What would you say about someone who spent their entire life cutting up paper into very small strips, but then never did anything with the paper? It would be completely irrational, and in that sense, also non-human. It would make absolutely no sense. So for all of our activity that's truly human, it has to be rational, and all of it has to aim at happiness. So Aristotle is making a grand claim here that the purpose and goal of our existence, the purpose and goal of our life, is to pursue happiness. This is a claim that very many people will find completely non-controversial, but it's a crucial moment in the sense that we have to decide our own stance on this. Is Aristotle correct that happiness is what we all aim at? Okay, now he makes a final claim in Book 1, Chapter 1, and that concerns the master art or science of becoming happy. If all human activity has an art or a science behind it, and our ultimate goal is to become happy, then the pursuit of happiness also must be an art or a science. The goal of the individual becoming happy is objectively good. Aristotle is not a subjectivist or a non-realist or a relativist or anyone who denies the objective good of happiness. But what he says is that the goal of the individual to achieve happiness is subordinate to or lesser than the goal of the collective achieving happiness. Now, in Aristotle's lifetime, the collective would mean a city-state. That means a city and the outlying agricultural area that supported it in terms of food. That would be a city-state. He lived later on in his life in Athens after he immigrated from Macedonia and lived in the city-state of Athens. Now, the happiness of a collective like Athens is much more valuable than the happiness of the individual. He's not denying that the happiness of the individual matters and is objectively good. But if it's objectively good and there are more individuals in the collective than there are just sitting in one seat, then the happiness of the collective must be greater in value than the happiness of the individual. There also has to be a science and art of achieving the collective happiness. Now, if the art or science behind the individual pursuing happiness is ethics, then the art or science of achieving the happiness of the collective is what we're going to call politics. That has an immediate ramification. What that means is that ethics is a subordinate art or science to politics. Instead of politics being below ethical theory and practice, politics is above it. Now, I have to defuse this immediately because we realize that in the 21st century, politics has a very, very negative connotation to the word. By politics generally will mean a kind of life or death struggle between two parties that want to win all of the goods forever, and it becomes a brutal struggle. That's not at all what Aristotle meant by politics. What he meant by politics was civic activity. The life of the citizen inside of the city-state as an active member of that city-state. So politics now is going to be the art or science of how we can make the collective group the happiest. That concludes my comments to Book 1, Chapter 1. That is our first talking session.